Amazon procurement nerds are back, recording early for us, 7 a.m. in the Bay Area, outside of our normal recording schedule. Dr. E and I have both been quite the jet setters. You more so than me because you were international, but
Yep.
I had quite an adventure surviving two tornadoes, not
Two tornadoes. Good
two
Lord.
tornadoes in Nashville. My first time ever living through a tornado warning, and then crazy massive flooding from the second tornado, which then caused mass issues throughout the state. But in my area where I was staying, I was at the Sheridan Grand downtown and woke up Sunday morning, which was so thankful that I was actually able to get home to a hotel with no water and no power. And it was out for over 13 hours.
Oof.
So no toilets, no sinks, no showers. So it was a rough, it was a rough travel day. And I am so appreciative that I have clean hair and was able to take a shower.
Now sometimes that isn't that just the best is if you like if you've been traveling a lot or whatever. I mean, or two tornado you live through two tornadoes, like but then to finally get to the shower is just like the greatest feeling.
So I love country music, and
Mm,
I
as
lived
do
in
I.
Austin. I lived in Austin, so I think it kind of grew on me. I didn't listen to it nearly as much before I was a Texan. And so my boyfriend Paul came with me on the trip, and we went to the Country Music Hall of Fame, which is downtown near Broadway. And they had a Luke Combs exhibit in the museum. They have a section where they rotate out and do a deep dive. So literally everything from baby photos, baby toys, childhood toothbrush, notes from teachers. So like total get to know up close the stars. So he was the main focus. Um, but anyway, so the
Well, what I'm a huge Luke Combs
yeah,
fan, so
me
that's
too. And it added his cute little history of his with his wife and their marriage. And anyway, I thought it was well done.
the
So
thing about his songs also is he writes a lot about
he
his
does.
life. Like so and there's this that this the video for doing this, if you ever get a chance to watch that, that's so great because it's one of his childhood friends and the song's about oh I presume it's about his childhood friend that was there for him. So
Being a marketer, I'm a huge believer in storytelling, and I
yeah.
think songwriting and country music singers in particular like to talk about their life and experiences. So I'm a big fan. So we are just finishing up on Saturday at the museum, and the tornado alerts start going off. Well, a big part of the museum is massive windows. Windows and tornadoes, not a good combination. So they took everyone that was in the museum into the theater. So we had a hide, whatever you call it, stay in shelter, probably for 30 minutes, I would say.
Wow.
And then a group of us, there's a storm tracker guide that's really big in Nashville that we were all following on Twitter. And then you can pull up a live stream and actually see the tornadoes and the craziness. But then, so we got that was done. They let us out, and then it was torrential downpour for hours after. Now, we had umbrellas, but a lot of people did not and just went along their day, bar hopping and doing what people do on Broadway, completely soaked. And I just looked at that and thought, that is miserable, and that is not for me. Not something that I would be doing. And then again, wake up in the super early morning to no power and no water. So craziness all around. Our United flight, which was a direct flight, I pay more. I'm a huge direct flight person. I avoid connecting flights at all costs. Somehow made it out on time Sunday night. So I am so appreciative and thankful because spending another night in Nashville and trying to find a new hotel that had water and power would have been a little crazy. So enough about my crazy travels and my
Well,
rant.
can I just say though that well, that wasn't a rant. That was actually just
Yeah.
an interesting story about tornadoes. I think we as Californians forget that other parts of the country deal with these weather events because when we were in Ohio for 4 years and we experienced tornadoes and it's just so like it I think if right now if an earthquake hit California, I think we'd keep recording. We'd be like,
Yeah.
yeah, okay, yeah, whatever. But I people I talk to all over, like when I say I'm from California, they're like, "Oh my God, what about all the earthquakes?" And then I just think you become acculturated to it. But like in other parts of the country, like tornadoes, like can be very like wild for Californians that don't tend to experience those.
Yeah. Tornadoes are their earthquakes, right?
Yeah,
It's just,
yeah.
but yeah, totally.
I
My
I
first,
remember when we were in Ohio, I was walking the dogs and it was only a couple hundred yards from the house and the tornado sirens went off and so I'm like I'm out in the open so I go running back to the house and and just as I got there it just completely unloaded and I mean it is scary it is or at least for me it was like super scary and I just got back in time so
yeah, well, just watching it now, again, it wasn't that close to us, but when you watch the live stream or see it,
yeah
it's just crazy the force that is behind something like that. And then it's done. It's like so quick,
yeah
right? It's
yeah
here and then it's gone.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, well, I'm
So you
glad you're safe.
travel.
Yeah, glad you made it back safely
So
and
I'm
got a
home.
hot shower.
Yes, I'm home. I'm showered. I have clean hair, clean clothes. So you traveled this last week, Dr. E, 2 events and
Hmm.
2 countries. So I'm really, really curious. Well, actually, both events were practitioner events versus industry events. So I think I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the differences between kind of more formal event company hosted events versus solution provider. But also, you keynoted at a Zip conference. I've not attended a Zip conference before, and really curious to get your thoughts and perspectives on their event.
Yeah. So, the lot to unpack there. I've become a real fan of vendor conferences, and this goes back all the way to Spark, the Scout conference, right? Right, literally right
The last
before.
conference before the world shut down.
Yeah, exactly. So, we tend to forget. I mean, everybody remembers the conference, but that it was a vendor conference, and there was 400, 500 people there, and it was amazing, and everybody there had a great time. And like I said, I think I've mentioned this before. I still get people connected from that conference, and so when we look at the impact conferences or vendor conferences can have it's significant and certainly vendors have to get to a certain level of both of clients or customers and prospects and of course revenue or funding so, but I have really come to appreciate vendor conferences. Obviously, I still love DBW. I think it's bigger and it's a slightly different thing anyway. But the thing is, when you go to a vendor conference, you know why you're there, you know who's sponsoring it, and everybody is on the same page. We're not hiding anything. We know that Zip paid for the or paid for the place and everything, and everything is sponsored by Zip or Certuo, which is the other one I went to, and it just takes the sort of I'll call it sleaziness. That's an over categorization of it, but just like I don't have to worry that a bunch of vendors paid a bunch of money to be sit in a tech or an expo hall, and I got to go get my badge scanned. So,
I call
so
that there's no hidden agenda. It's all out in the
yeah,
open.
much better for description. And so then everybody's free, and I find that the people are just sort of relaxed and just chit chatting, and they're like so they're. I find though that the conferences to be quite full of networking, and that I think is networking for me, and then just sitting and observing people talking. So at the Zip conference, I'm not even sure how to describe where it was. Bishopsgate? I don't even think that's right. But anyway, beautiful, beautiful tower in London and great views and lots of windows. And there was about 190 people there. And uh, like everybody I talked to was quite pleasant, quite happy, and really engaged. I have to say, just quite engaged and doing the. I saw tons of networking and generally just people hanging out having fun.
What was the format? Was it a one day?
One day, it was
Okay,
one
yeah.
day.
The last couple that they've done in San Francisco, which have been in October and just on dates that that didn't work for me. I think they were also one day events in the States.
Yeah, so I went to the San Francisco one 2 years ago, and I was the closing speaker that day. And at the end of the day, there were over 400 people there still. So it was again, and it captured. It was very compelling, and the people there were very engaged. I think I got there at four, or I went on at 4 o'clock. Like it was really engaged, and then I stayed for drinks after. And so, again, a very captive audience, but an audience that wanted to be there, that knew why they were there. And I think a lot of them were still, especially 2 years ago, trying to learn what Zip was doing. And Zip had announced a couple new big releases, and so there was a lot of excitement. But even the London event was I mean, it was just great. I mean, all I could say is because, and of course, I do my presentation and then I talk to people and mix and mingle, and it was just really like fun. Our friend of the show, Susan Walsh, was there. She spoke earlier in the day, and so you see people like Susan, and yeah, it was really fun.
What I want to talk a little bit about what you spoke about because I think I'm curious. I feel like there's kind of themes, and I'm curious what your theme was for this specific audience. But I will say for the go to market leaders listening to the episode, I think doing some sort of localized event, if you are a solution provider, is definitely something to think about. Now, the Zip productions, I think, are quite elaborate, and a startup budget is not necessarily gonna allow you the venue and the audio and all the things that come with that, but I think there are scrappy ways to get folks together. It doesn't even have to be a whole day event. It could be half day, it could be an afternoon, it could be an evening, but there is tremendous power in having your customers sell you to prospects.
Yeah.
And so that is just I can't overstate that enough. They're just as a marketer, the most important thing we can do is help our customers tell their story so then other folks understand pain points, understand the value versus us as a sales organization going and telling folks how great we are and how great our platform is. So just really, really important and can be a lot of value there.
Yeah, and maybe a topic for another time, but I actually talked to a startup, and not and we had, after Zip, Carney hosted a founders circle where we brought a bunch of founders, in which we've done before, in the on the next night, and one of the startups asked to meet me beforehand, and I spent 30 minutes with him, and he was talking about he doesn't have a big budget. He was talking about doing guerrilla marketing. And so I think definitely a topic for another time, but
So what was your I know you've already presented a few times this year, but Doctor, I think it would be interesting to talk a little bit about what was your kind of overarching theme and message for this talk.
yeah, so my theme was technological adoption. And so the 84% of digital transformations fail. So why do we think we can do AI? And actually 84%, I'd say it's like 100% of digital transformations fail. So why do we think we could do AI? And so I really start with that premise. In this case, I used the Ukraine war, because the Ukrainian army has done a masterful job at adopting technology and using technology as a force multiplier. So I started with that, and then I talked about current themes in procurement, and namely around AI, the investments in AI, and the reduction of spend in traditional procure tech, namely the suites, but a little bit even the SaaS providers. And so I took everybody through the various SaaS procurement eras, and then I talked really about the people, because this is a people issue. And yeah, I gave the quote that within 18 months we'll have all the technology we could possibly need within the enterprise. But the problem is Excel and apathy, and so that got a good laugh. But as it always does. But then I also talk about generations and why now is different, because we're at a massive generational change in the workforce. And then how do we learn AI? I didn't talk too much about AI. That's kind of where I left it, at the people, and just sort of left it there. So
Interesting. So, you spoke at Zip, then you got back on a plane and keynoted another, right, solution provider. Was it also another one dayer?
so it was a 2 day, and this was for Certuo, and it was in Dubrovnik, and I absolutely love Dubrovnik, and doing a conference there is amazing. And so I mean, this is my third year in a row. Now, I didn't keynote this one. I did something totally different, which stretched me and pushed my skill set, because I hadn't done this in a while. I did a master class on building agents for the audience, and that was kind of one of the closing sessions. And
So did the attendees, was it interactive? Were they on their computers building as well?
I gave people the option that you could watch me and follow along, or you could pull out your laptop or whatever device and follow along. And I made it very straightforward and simple. And I used the Google Gemini suite of products. So all you had to have was a Gmail account, and it was quite successful. And, it was bumpy, like the internet, of course. Like I go to hit a feature, and then it like starts spinning, and this is like, oh, that's why I don't do live demos, or why typically I don't have audio or video, because these things always like pop up on you, these little gremlins. So I had some gremlins, and I had to vamp, and at one point the page is spinning, and I'm like, so how about that Donald Trump? So it was just, you sort of have to fill time and space, and those were new skills for me. I hadn't used those in probably a decade. So um, anyway, but it was well received, and I saw a lot of light bulbs go off, and um, I did so I did a agent. So we did it live. I did an agent doing deep research, then using Notebook LM to take a bunch of data and process it for you, and then we built live a negotiations agent, and one of the audience members, from one of the companies, is in the midst of a SAP renewal. So I just took that, and we built an agent dedicated to understanding SAP, negotiating with SAP using game theory, Carney's chessboard, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that really like captured the audience's imagination.
So speaking of agents, last week I met one of the co-founders and the CEO of a company, which I think Dr. Eloise, I think you had met with him in the last like month or so. But the company is called Didero,
Hmm.
Diedero, and they are full blown go to market selling AI procurement agents.
Yeah.
And it was really, really interesting to talk to him about their go to market strategy And it seems like, to no surprise, their biggest challenge is the status quo and people being open to innovating and trying something new. But
Excel in apathy. There you
excel
go.
in apathy, yep, to go back to your theme of your session earlier. But what was interesting is I said, "Where are you getting your most adoption?" And he said, "Private equity."
Yeah.
So
Uh-huh.
private equity, they're coming in and they're on a mission to cut costs
Yeah.
really at any cost. They're not as focused on culture and leadership, and so they're having success with private equity firms coming in and wanting to reduce headcount and replacing that headcount with AI agents. So that was just first time I have actually seen a full-blown go-to-market strategy around AI agents specific for procurement. And in their world, it's really direct. It's a
Yeah.
lot harder to have an agent right now that's on the indirect side. So they're heavily focused on the manufacturing vertical.
Yeah. Um, and I think that's a winner. Yeah, I know the Diderot folks, and I actually they made it into my coolest things of 2024 video, and I it's a slam dunk to me. It's a bunch of AI procurement agents. Like, yes, please, and give me more. And that's, yeah, I think we're at the verge of seeing like this explosion of agents.
Hmm. Yeah, and there's three co-founders. I met Lorenz.
Yeah, Lorenz. Yeah, I love Lorenz. He's a great guy.
They're all repeat Stanford entrepreneurs. One of them, or I think actually Lorenz also had some experience in consulting, specifically in the procurement space. And it just kind of is interesting how they've evolved and how they're going to have to continuously evolve, because you've got to have people progressive and open enough to try and adopt something like this.
Yeah. And yeah, the three co-founders are amazing. And Lorenz actually, and again, this gets to what's the word, sort of that I'm gonna sound like an old person, like gumption. I can't think of the right word, but because he just reached out to me before DPW last year and said, "Hey, can we have breakfast?" And I'm like, "Of course, sure. Come to my hotel," and we had breakfast. And like very few people actually just reach out and just like take that chance. And like I'm always receptive, and so I thought I was really impressed back in October. I guess it was October.
Random side note, I know we're kind of bouncing all over the place with our crazy travels last week, but I mentioned Diderot and their focus on the manufacturing space. Another big thing in the direct world is Lighthouse and their
Hmm.
$33.5 million Series A funding, which is a huge Series A. And especially in this market and this economy, you haven't seen a lot of fundraisers and specifically that size. So kudos to the CEO, Spencer Penn. Dr. Eloise and I are both friends with him, based out of the Bay Area here. So curious to see what they're going to do with that money and how they're going to invest.
I'm a huge Light Source and Spencer fan. I try not to wear branded things when we're recording, but I do. I almost grabbed. I do have a hoodie that is for Lighthouse branded, and so I. But anyway, I almost grabbed it this morning. But yeah, no, I mean, that's a huge Series A, but I have no doubt they're going to be successful. I mean, like super successful. They're already successful, but there's so few direct material solutions. And the thing about direct materials is you have you have to have walked the walk. You can't be some like I don't know analytics person or some smart person from even from Stanford and just walk in and say, "Oh, I'm going to redo I'm going to redo direct material sourcing." I mean, you got to have the chops, and Spencer has the chops, and he worked at Tesla, and so that when you hear him tell his story, he is very compelling, and he's definitely on a trajectory for success.
Yeah. So, any closing thoughts on lessons learned from your two Um, Presentations last week.
My only lesson is try what you can do not to do live demos because they never work out. I mean, just as a sidebar, I had everything loaded on my computer, but we got it set up. But then we got it set up at a break, but then there was one session and then I went on. So of course, when the computer opens up and it's just asleep, and so that was one for the one for taking a or to remember. The other is, I mean, actually just enjoying these conferences. And like I said, Dubrovnik was beautiful. Everybody was happy. And again, I think I've talked about this. Everybody stays at the same hotel, or most everybody stays at the hotel. So when you go down for breakfast, I met just a bunch of great people. I met folks from Certuo that were there, and I think this bears, we're going to have, just to tease a future episode, we're going to talk about the people who put on these conferences, because I actually find that to be really a telling, like the people that put this stuff on really tells you a lot about the culture and the competency of the organization. And with Zip and Sergio, those teams are amazing. So
Yeah, and I will say in closing, having hosted and put on many, many events myself, it is a lot harder than it looks,
yeah.
and ton of effort and planning that goes into it. Shout out to Shannon on my team at UMNITSA. We have a full-time events person, and I don't know how she does all she does running a full virtual and in-person program. There's just a lot. So totally agree. Kudos to all the folks in our industry that work behind the scenes to put on these events and make them happen.
In fact, for prepping for that episode is going to be difficult because it's going to have to go back to a lot of people and sort of figure out who, so we can like highlight folks.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things to avoid. I mean, you want to talk about lessons learned. There are definitely some things that I will happily share, that I will hope that other folks do not repeat those same mistakes when putting on events.
But what's interesting is I bet you, if you could talk to the Zip or the Certuo people from last week, and they'll give you a laundry list, sort of like you, of like, oh, these things didn't go right or whatever. But I can tell you, as an attendee, they were flawless. They were amazing, and pretty much, I did the Spend HQ one in January. I did the Chain IQ one a couple weeks ago. The Brazil one, like, these have been amazing events, and as a participant, I haven't noticed anything that was off. So, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah, it's all about the vibe. If you can figure out how to
Totally.
create a buzz and a sense of community, and which will, it just kind of as a byproduct product, create a sense of FOMO, and the folks that aren't there kind of feel
Yeah.
like they're missing out. That's the hardest thing, but that's where the magic happens.
Yeah.
Alrighty, we will see you back next Wednesday for another episode.